So next I'm going to introduce a dear friend, Julie Hayden, who is the director of Dialectical Living. Julie has been a real force in my life. She's helped loved ones that I know that have so-called borderline personality disorder or self-regulation disorder. It's where they get so escalated, it's impossible to function. They just get so overwhelmed. So I just want to read Julie's background. She developed Dialectical Living because another major institution wasn't able to keep up with the need of helping families with somebody that had borderline personality disorder or self-regulation disorder, which by the way was commonly female. So whether it was a wife or a daughter or a mother. And she helped me to help someone create skills that they could focus. But here's her background. She develops and facilitates dialectical behavior therapy. So that's considered one of the most helpful therapies for people that have self-regulation disorder. It employs mindfulness, and it helps you to give really specific skills that you can use to help. Dialectical Living is made up of social workers, psychotherapists, mental health nurses, and peer support workers, all extensively trained in DBT. So I'm a peer support worker with the organization because I took all of her training. So they work with persons with challenges regulating emotion, work with their families and healthcare practitioners to bring dialectical behavior therapy into their practices. So Julie is a wonderfully warm person. She's also a fellow yogini, a yoga practitioner, and it's just her warmth that I find comes across in everything that she does. So here we go. Okay, so Julie, I've known you for a really long time. I've taken your training in peer support as a peer support worker with Dialectical Living, your organization. But I want you to introduce yourself because there's so much that you've done and I want it to be thorough. So please introduce yourself.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me. My name is Julie Hayden, and I have been a yoga teacher for many years and also a social worker with Dialectical Living. Dialectical Living is an organization that helps people who have challenges with stress and anxiety and mental health, emotion regulation specifically. A lot of the challenges that people are having out there have a lot to do with emotion regulation and the related anxiety and stress that can go along with that.
Yes.
And so I'm just really happy to be able to do and honored to do the work that I do.
Yes, yes, and you do it so efficiently.
Thank you.
So would you say, like, you started your organization because many people couldn't get the help that they needed in other organizations, and that's how I found you, because I went to a major organization to get help, and there was about a year and a half waiting list, and then I found you. And you were basically offering a more comprehensive program for families who had, for example, a wife or a daughter. It was often female that was having emotion regulation disorder. So would you say that there's a common demographic? Well, actually, let me start with, it seems like there's more people experiencing what we call anxiety or anxiety disorders or mood disorders now. Would you say there's more now than there was 20 years ago?
Absolutely. And just to touch on what you'd mentioned about wait lists, it may have been a year and a half many years ago when we first met, and now the wait lists are even longer. In some places, 3 to 4 years wait lists at major organizations in many cities. And so getting the help that people need is really tough.
Are you getting a lot of those calls?
Yeah, I'm getting a lot more calls. There are thankfully a lot more organizations out there that are doing the similar work using this particular type of therapy called DBT, Dialectical Behavior Therapy.
Right.
And it's really nice to see that there's more organizations out there doing it. However, they're all fee for service, so affordability can be an issue for getting help for people who may otherwise not be able to afford some of the services out there.
Is there something somebody can do that can't afford it? Is there some way for them to...
Some organizations, like Dialectical Living, offers subsidies every time we run the program, a couple of subsidies at half cost.
Yeah, so what is the more common person that you find with emotion regulation disorder? The common demographic or age or where in the lifespan, if there is?
Well, that's a really interesting question because mental health just doesn't discriminate. It's a demographic that's all ages, all careers, all statuses. Anyone could, have come down with having mental health challenges.
Yeah.
Something happens in their life, they lose a family member, and other things. Relationship breakups are huge, for people being able to have the tools to manage that, which we don't really learn, right? We don't really learn these skills when we're growing up or in school.
That's
and
right.
It's nice to see that in some high schools they're implementing mindfulness and yoga.
Yes.
And how important that is to developing young minds and their ability to handle stress and anxiety
Yes,
and
that's right.
conflict and friendships and so many
Yes.
things that young people today and as we get older need to manage. So to answer that question, anyone can struggle with anxiety and mental health.
Yeah, that's what I've seen in my yoga studio. It can be somebody in their 60s and 70s. It doesn't have to be somebody in their 30s. And also in the schools, I am seeing a lot more emotional literacy being taught. Like, for example, through the program I teach with, the Roots of Empathy, we teach emotional literacy.
Right.
We teach what to do when you're feeling overwhelmed or you're being bullied. So we're really explaining certain requirements of life that feel overwhelming, and then you ask for help. So I am seeing in the school system there is a lot more emphasis on emotional literacy.
That's so great.
Many people experience anxiety, and it keeps them from living a healthy and peaceful life. Like they can't even go to work, or they can't go out, they can't go to social things. And so their life becomes smaller. It really shrinks because there's just so many things that they're capable of doing. And it's almost like they have to just do the stuff they have to do, like work. So there isn't even a balance, work-life balance. Specifically, it can cause them to feel like they can't even trust themselves. I think trust is a big thing. Trust themselves to do the things that they want to do. So Julie, can you explain what happens in our brains when we experience anxiety? What happens there?
And so what happens in the brain, and I like to explain it with the hand model. So
Perfect.
the hand model is, most of the time we wander around like this, right? This is our head. Our prefrontal cortex is this part with our fingers over what we call the amygdala, the emotion center of the brain. And so those two parts are connected, and they stay connected as long as we're, wandering along and doing okay and unstressed and in a good place and not experiencing a lot of anxiety. Then we have these parts of the brain connected. And this part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, is responsible for impulse control, emotion regulation, top-down planning, good decision making. And so what happens when we have stress, big emotions, anger, fear, sadness, even love, it can be an uncomfortable big emotion,
Right.
and can cause this sort of disconnect. And so we flip our lid, and what happens is that then these parts of the brain are no longer connected. And then we no longer have, or offline, let's say, right? The prefrontal cortex is offline. So at that point, we no longer have that part of the brain that says, maybe I shouldn't have the second or third glass of wine, or maybe I shouldn't say that to someone.
Right.
Or maybe I should, be able to regulate my emotions more. But it just can't happen when we flipped our lid.
Right.
So oftentimes this is when people have a really hard time. And getting this back connected and together has a lot to do with so many things that we can do that can help our brain and these two parts of the brain to come back together.
Right.
Things like yoga and mindfulness and dialectical behavior therapy, of course, which is what I do, which really helps to bring these parts of the brain back through distraction, mainly, which is a very different approach from approaches from years ago. We used to try and think things through, right? Let's just sit down, talk about it, think through it.
Right.
And when we have really big stressful emotions, we flipped our lid, it's impossible to think through it because the thinking part of the brain, which is this prefrontal cortex, is offline.
Right.
So we're left with the emotion center of the brain sort of running the show in that fight, flight, hide mode. A lot of my clients talk about this being in fight, flight all the time, and how uncomfortable that can be when we're having these high emotions and high stress and high anxiety.
Yeah.
And so this process can be helped by many things.
Thanks. That's actually really helpful because I feel like it helps people feel sane, knowing that all of that is going on. Like it's not just that they're crazy; they're actually flipped their lid. There's actually no connection. Their high functioning front of the brain isn't working, And so, yeah, this is real. Your blood pressure's gone up. Your circulation is being pulled away from the gut and going into the arms and legs. So you're going to have, problems in the gut, the enteric brain. So I think it's kind of neat to know, wow, this is real. This is not just because I don't know how to control myself. I'm actually out of control. I've flipped my lid. Everything is different. And I can't do anything to help myself unless I know that. And I feel like knowing that is knowing there's a fire, and then you can start to prepare for fire drill. Like you can know where the exits are. Like really, I know it sounds almost optimistic, but I really like people to kind of get it, like go, whoa, this is what's happening in my brain. Because when I took your course, Dialectical Behavior Therapy, for family members, so for my family member, you have no idea, Julie, it totally changed my life, because I was released from the grips of the terror that I was in, of the situations that I was in with my loved one, where they would flip their lid and get so broken, and I was helpless. And everything that you taught us about the brain, I remember all the slides and you showing us in our binder, and I was like, that's exactly what happens. And I was validated. I felt sane. It was like, yeah, there was nothing that I could do to help this person. It was so painful. And yet it was real. It wasn't because I kind of imagined it, because then a minute later they're fine. So knowing that this is actually happening in the brain, and we're talking about kind of everyday stress, but when it can turn into, increased inability to know that you're overwhelmed, then it gets into a mental illness. I love not using the word mental illness, so I'll be honest.
Me too.
I like using the word emotional health, because isn't our mental our emotions? Like I feel like so much of our mental is our emotions, and that's where the mind comes in. Like, does this make sense? I love to help people know the difference between the mind and the mind and the brain. The mind is relational. It's like, okay, so I could be sitting here with you and I'm having this conversation, but there's also so many things going on. Like, is my posture good? Like that's the mind. It's playing out all of these feelings and these ideals that we might subscribe to. So the mind is quite busy, whereas the brain just has the straight facts. So it'd be like you're in Paris and you saw the Eiffel Tower. You can't change that. It's the Eiffel Tower. But someone else might say, none of that was ever built around the Eiffel Tower when I was here. And that's the mind, relating to the world now and how it is. And whereas the Eiffel Tower is just a straight up fact. And so I wish people could know that in the brain, when we flip our lid, as you're saying, and I love that example, then my brain can't help me at all. So how can I change the brain? Through the mind, through training the mind to help the brain in its crazy proclivities. The thing, like it can change the proclivities of the brain. And that's a huge relief, because then you realize you actually can help yourself, which we can't access when we flip our lid. So just knowing as soon as we flip, it's like, okay, I know. That self-awareness is everything. That mindfulness is everything. And then we can, and again, now I'm taking over, but we can pause, and there's something that can pause and go, okay, it's full on. And that's self-compassion, like that's empathy. Or if you can see it in the other person, like see if you can somehow be there and like really, 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 really pause and breathe. That's what I'm noticing, is if you're with somebody that's under anxiety, instead of going, will you please calm down? Is your blood sugar low? Like we usually kind of get mad because we're supposed to be so in control.
And that's unhelpful.
Yeah, so unhelpful. So if we can honor, whoa, that person's anxious, let's kind of order for them at the restaurant. Do you want me to get your usual? Like something, be kind, instead of, oh my God, they're getting all anxious again. And then we get frustrated because we think they ought to be in control.
And then they get frustrated for being anxious.
That's right. And if we could recognize we live in an anxious culture, like we live in an anxious culture. So for us to be anxious in public or in the world, it's all around. It's a resonance, it's a field. So for us to not pick up that frequency would be pretty skilled, in a lot of places. Subway or at a party or a networking or just walking on the street, because some people won't make eye contact. That's harsh. So these are, I'm just finding that it's so much more tense in the world today. In this beautiful world, it still is beautiful. and we still have the same brains we had at the time of Cleopatra and the Beatles and Mahatma Gandhi, but we have so many frequencies that are playing on the brain externally. So how do we train the brain with the mind to be more calm? Could that be my next question?
That's a good question. One thing was that came to mind when you were speaking about everyone has this happening, right? It's important, and you touched on mental health as a concept or construct, and that using those words might feel invalidating for someone, or feel like it can't be fixed, or the medical model, which is sort of sick and needing fixing, and perhaps it's managing things in a different way. But getting back to mental health in general, and this flip the lid concept, is that this happens to everyone, and not just people who have mental health issues or ADHD or BPD or bipolar, or any one of those disorders.
And BPD being bipolar disorder, or borderline personality disorder.
Yes, borderline personality disorder.
Right.
We don't get too much into labels or diagnoses at Dialectical Living. However, it's good to sort of be on the same page and understand that all of these particular diagnoses are considered mental health challenges, and this happens more frequently. So it's not that it doesn't happen in the main population. It's just that for people who struggle with big emotions and more anxiety and are more predisposed to these kinds of things, that this happens more frequently and more intensely. So there's this concept of going up more quickly and not being able to return to baseline as quickly as, say, the typical person who may not experience as much of ability to regulate their emotions.
Right. So we all experience anxiety. We all have fears and apprehensions, and we're risk managing. But there's some that when they feel it, it kind of floods them, like it takes over, and then it's impossible for them to really just even function.
Yeah, people who are more sensitive, actually, and I love the concept of HSPs, highly sensitive people. They say that 20% of the population are HSP. And I think that a subset of that, perhaps people who are more sensitive, which is a gift. It's actually a gift. It's something the world needs, sensitive people.
Yeah.
Right? I like when I have clients call me and say, well, I struggle with emotion dysregulation. And I say to them, well, I bet you would also be the first person to stand up for social justice and the first person to travel all the way across the city to take the baby raccoons to the raccoon retreat. Right? Because these are the people that have heightened empathy and resourcefulness and creativity and this beautiful nature about them.
Yes.
So we need, people who are more sensitive. The flip side of that is that it can be really tough to be more sensitive. Just walking into a room, you can sense the anxiety or sense the love or whatever is going on in an energy in a room, and that can really be felt in the body by someone who tends to be more sensitive and tuned in to others, and which of course a lot of us who get into the field of helping others do have this intense increased sensitivity, because it's what helps us to help others.
Yes, we can intuit more. We can help
more tuned in to people's feelings and emotions.
What I've noticed now, is I call it being a secret agent, is that I'll feel like if I do come across somebody who's hostile and I'm in a public situation, is I'll immediately fill in. That's the best way I can put it, is like I'll just fill in with presence or love or consciousness, like just really be there. Because as soon as I feel something coming at me, the last thing I want to do is go at it, like become forceful. Force is force. And whereas if you're in power or place of presence, fullness, it tends to dispel the situation because they've got nothing to get. They can't claw at you and pull at you because there's nothing to get, because you're staying in peace. And it's not that you're a holier than thou and you've got this figured out and it's new age white light and you're staying all separate. It's that you're just not willing to participate in anything that isn't an exchange, a dynamic of care or communication, something that's efficient and effective and helpful. So there's something that won't participate, call it Gandhian, unless it's just standing in its mission or its clarity or how it wants to live that moment. So I've been really practicing that for about 1.5 years, and just noticing that when somebody is hostile or something is harsh, right away, okay, really, really fill in, like really feel alive instead of contract and go, like I don't want that anymore. I don't want to live in contraction, in that fear anymore. And it is very easy to do as a sensitive person.
Mm-hmm.
And it is beautiful to be sensitive because you do experience so much joy. You do experience so much more connection.
More passion.
Yeah, way more comes in. It's like you have way more receptor sites, and some of them are massive in your passions. And what a beautiful existence that is. And you're open prey. So
that would be a good way of putting it.
So it's like both. So I just had to add that in while we were in it, is practicing that as soon as something starts to feel hostile, and it could be my own thought about myself, right? And then just noticing and go, okay, fill in. And then you practice it, and it does become like a fire drill. Like the smoke is the, what am I doing? I'm getting caught up in that person's anger, and I don't want to. And I'm not going to defend myself. There's no accuracy in what they're saying. So just be here and not participate. And that usually frustrates any energy that's trying to get you, and it kind of leaves or it quells. And then there's a capacity for maybe a different field, a different exchange.
And it's another way of saying we have this skill in DBT called radical acceptance.
Right, remind me of that one.
Yeah, this concept that this is a really tough one to learn too, because when people think of acceptance, they think, I don't want to accept. That's not right.
Like
it's
you're
not
agreeing.
True. It's not. I don't approve of this. And yet, acceptance isn't about all those things. It's about just seeing what's in front of us. It is what it is, right? Today is a day where I feel I'm having more anxiety, and that's okay. Tomorrow, it's temporary, right? It's fleeting. It moves. It changes.
Right.
And for people to understand that it's not always, the same. It does change. It's like pain. Pain can sort of move around the body and change and be better or worse at different times. And sort of we accept it is what it is, right? I love that saying. I use it a lot with my son.
Yes.
Now he uses it a lot with me. It is what it is, Mom. But yeah, radical acceptance. This concept of that it is there. I see it. It's in front of me, and I can do something about it, or I can just accept that there isn't anything I can do about this.
Right.
It is
so
what
like
it
the
is.
Serenity prayer and
For now, yes, exactly.
So totally
That's
being
a
with
good
what
way
it is.
to practice
Right.
that concept for sure.
If we experience anxiety on a regular basis, does it start to become a well-traversed route in our brain, like neuroplasticity? Like if we get anxious quite easily, does it start to become a brain's pathway that's known and memorized and repeated a lot?
Oh, that's interesting. I think there's two things there where we could go with that question. The brain is neuroplastic, the ability for it to change. And they're actually, and touching on something you said earlier, there's actually been MRIs done, so pre and post this particular therapy, DBT. However, DBT is very much based in sort of Eastern world philosophy, mindfulness. So the same would follow for someone who perhaps practiced mindfulness for, in this case, it was a 12-month period for the study. But they found that at the end that they could actually see greater connections. So what happened, they do a pre-MRI, that's the brain scan, and then they did a 12-month series of dialectical behavior therapy, including mindfulness. And at the end, they found that there was greater connections, like literally increased gray matter in between these two parts of the brain to help keep them more connected.
Yes.
So, mindfulness and DBT and yoga and all the things that can help, change the brain, because I do believe that the brain is very changeable, very neuroplastic, that can help bring these parts back so that we can think more clearly, and that thinking part of our brain is back online.
Does anybody that has a really hard time with emotional health and mental health, do they not like themselves?
Not everyone, but I think also when it comes to the basic population, I think a lot of people struggle with hating themselves, and you wouldn't know it, right? Like you see successful people in the workplace that you work with, colleagues, friends, and you think they have it all together, and that when you really get into a conversation, a more vulnerable conversation, you find just how often this can happen.
Yes.
That people don't like themselves.
Yes, very much so.
Because it's really tough when we don't like ourselves to think we're worthy or deserving of practicing skills that are going to help us feel better, which is what I find in my line of work, in opening people up to practicing the skills to help them believe that they're worth it.
Yes.
And so that's a really important piece.
Yes. I find actually when I'm working with a client who has, say, type 2 diabetes, and they've been really going away from their diet, and now their blood glucose is at 11, and like they're in really bad shape, and it's causing UTIs and other problems. And they'll just laugh and go, well, I was at that party and everyone said, help yourself, have more. And I find they laugh. It's like a nervousness because they've given up the belief that they can stay true to themselves or change the habit, and so they just laugh it off. Or I hear women in menopause say, oh, I don't care anymore how I look. And they care, but they've just stopped wanting to care.
It's hard.
Yeah,
it's hard to care when you feel like you don't have control.
Exactly.
Or you feel like you're not worthy of change. Yeah.
And all of this is like, it's just this helpless place where it doesn't feel like they started well and then they fell off the wagon, so to speak, or they started Monday well and now it's Thursday and I'm gonna wreck it again, it doesn't matter. And so it's like we try to get out of it mattering, but we do matter. It does matter how we feel. And in a culture that doesn't care about how we feel, they want us to consume and they're caring about the bottom line, then we don't even have a culture that we're surrounded in to care about ourselves. That causes a fear of being selfish, especially I think that's the scariest word for women. Honestly, I do. Selfish. If somebody is, as a mother, is perceived as selfish, we're supposed to be, there's this way that we're supposed to be the more nurturing gender and etc. So
selfless.
Yeah. So to actually care for yourself, I remember when I had Sarah on my own, and I still go to the gym every day, and I remember another single mom calling me selfish. She was really not impressed, and there was just this like, how could you possibly do that? And I thought, well, it's called daycare at the gym. It was seen as, why would I take my time away from a newborn and not be there constantly? And that was just something that for her, she couldn't see, right? She couldn't see it. And so those are the moments that I find, if you're making changes for yourself, like to eat better, or maybe not to have a drink, or whatever it is, not have hard thoughts, and you start to steer away from it, if the culture, the family, or the partner that you're with still sees you, enjoying them in overeating or whatever it is, then it's the courage to break away from that way that it's always been, changing it. And that's where I think that's the hardest place. It's okay if you're on your own, but how much of our life are we on our own? We're usually relating to a family member or somebody. And so like to be clear, and I don't mean like hardcore and stoic, we just talked about that, how harsh it can be, but to be tender with yourself and stick with something and say, please, love, I really need to stay away from wine or sugar. I've got an autoimmune disease. And I want to feel better, and I really don't feel better when I do that. So I met a woman this week, and she has a totally different diet and life from her family. Her husband, sorry. The kids are all grown and gone. She has a totally different life from her husband because this is how she's eating. I'm eating plant-based and that's it. So he goes out for his wings and beer, and he's always like, you sure you don't want to come? She's like, no, I'm sick for 3 days after. So now they have this compassionate understanding. He doesn't understand it, that they each have their own choices. And that's happening until whatever next happens.
Right.
And you find out, you don't know.
Yeah.
I feel like we don't have the courage to not know what can happen when we make changes in our choices, how it's going to turn our relationships.
To be different and not be considered selfish or misunderstood, or how many people will just go ahead and eat what's offered, or go ahead and do just because everyone else is, and they don't want to feel somehow different. And yet it's so important to make decisions for ourselves. Because of course that would cause anxiety, not feeling well, engaging in behaviors and eating foods and things and sugar that doesn't make us feel good. And doing it just because everyone else is. Have you ever been somewhere where you could see that somebody was staying true to themselves and everybody else was kind of in a different way, a different vibration? And it's kind of refreshing, isn't it? Like maybe, I don't know, you're at a buffet and everyone's going, yeah, baby, or whatever it is, or a party. And then you see somebody, I don't know, they just look kind of pretty, like a good energy. And they're maybe not contributing to corrosive jokes or conversation. And they just feel really vibrant. And you kind of like, you see it,
Like it's like a tall poppy in the field. Like there's something
someone
that's just...
to admire who's being true to themselves.
Yeah, like you can feel it. I know a person like that. I saw him at the gym today, and I came right up to him and I said, Roger, I love that new thing you're doing. He's really like parkour, and he's doing this new thing where he can hold his body up off the bar on the side, like sideways, hold it straight out. And I said, I love the new sideways thing you're doing. And he had his leg up like this and he was stretching it. So I thought he thought I was talking about that. And I said, no, just that sideways thing. And he said, thank you. You know, it wasn't like, yeah, I've been working on it. It was like, thank you. We had a real exchange. And it's really, it's pure, it's whole. Like the whole person is there, not a person that's trying to be clean. They feel alive and clean, and so they can really be it. And they aren't trying to stoically present it or hold it up. It's refreshing. Yeah, it's very, very light. Julie, I know you have lived experience with anxiety. What has helped you when you get to that place? What's been helpful?
Well, I have to say teaching skills and the line of work I do is just so meaningful and helpful. I sometimes feel like I should be paying my clients.
I understand.
Because the work that I do helps me so greatly. And as we're a peer organization, and all of the staff at Dialectical Living have some form of lived
peer
experience.
Organization, that's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
And that we all have this sense of lived experience, and that makes it just that much more authentic and relatable for our clients.
Yes.
I'm, living these skills so that I'm practicing them as well. Like I expect that all of us at Dialectical Living, when we're teaching and facilitating groups, that we also do the home practice, and we also share with the clients each week, how did we use the skills? What did we do? What obstacles have we had? Because that's where a lot of learning can happen, when people look up to mentors who've been through it.
Yes.
Right? I think it's so important, the peer aspect, because you truly understand. I like to use the analogy of if you had lost a limb and you were going to a group on how to live with one less limb, and the person who was teaching you had all their limbs, how on earth could they really be able to understand what it's like to live like that?
Yeah.
So it's not so much different at all, really, for mental health and other areas.
Right. I like that because it kind of is. I like that because it kind of brings it into that interbeing again that Tish Nodhan spoke to, that we all had the same needs and we're really relating, rather than somebody who has the expertise and is the expert and has the answers and can really bestow them upon you.
Like, that doesn't work often, right? This is where the concept is sort of centered, client-centered, just like the work that you do, right? You follow a client-centered approach where you let them sort of lead and know that they have tons of knowledge about themselves and their body and the world and their experience in it, and drawing on that, as opposed to, this is what you should do and this is what you will do and this will help. And so it's that's not always as helpful. We talk about in my line of work appropriate self-disclosure, and what does that look like, and how does that actually bring the client in, and how important it is, whether or not you can completely relate to the person or have had similar challenges to them at all. There's still this concept of or skill set of self-disclosure, and that being really helpful for clients, and building that alliance and building that closeness, because the therapeutic alliance and the best predictor for success when you're working with a psychotherapist is hope and what's the other one? Hope, inspiration, so that they instill a sense of hope that you can get better, and connection. Hope and connection.
Yes.
And the way to get that connection is through some healthy self-disclosure.
Yes.
As part of the skill set. You got the expertise and some knowledge, you're client-centered, and bringing things together with that piece is so important. Perhaps, as you had mentioned, the world is,
becoming more separate and hostile, potentially.
Yeah, a lot of stuff has gone on in the last years that has certainly led people to have a more anxious existence.
Would you say that people get uncomfortable when you start to share something that's painful because it reminds them of their hurt and they don't want to go there? Like it's defense, it's caution?
I think so, yeah.
Like risk management, like, oh God,
yeah, because we
I'm in a
also
bad
live in a
marriage too, I
culture
don't want
where
to hear
it's like,
this.
have a problem, take a pill. Have a problem,
Yeah, go shopping.
have some ice cream, go shopping. And of course, that's like stamping out the pain and not being able to sit with it. We have some skills in DBT we call mindful of current emotion. So the idea that we want to sit with our emotions and just be curious about them and look at them and be with them and be really really mindful with them. And this can be really tough, but I think it's what's needed. I think we need to grow this muscle of being able to sit with pain.
Yeah.
Because, from a Buddhist perspective, we have that saying, I used to have a shirt that said suffering is optional. So the idea that ordinary pain is normal. It's, something that the human condition that we are going to experience, and we don't have to suffer with it.
Yes.
So there's things that we can do to make sure we don't slip into the suffering.
So what would you recommend, Julie, to someone to help them manage their anxiety? Because I know you teach so many skills in dialectical behavior therapy. And what would you say is maybe one of the more successful skills that you've taught?
Oh, my favorite skill. I like this. So probably my two favorite skills that I've used personally and find really helpful, actually three, radical acceptance, which we've touched on a little bit around. It is what it is. I see that it's there. It's in front of me. I can deal with it now because I see it. Now, when we, don't see it and it's not there, it's not really there, I don't really see it, we can't really change. So radical acceptance is one of my favorites. Opposite action is another one I really like, which is doing the opposite of what our mind and body might be telling us to do. It's like, okay, I don't want to go to the gym. No, I'm going to act opposite and I'm going to go to the gym.
Got it.
Right? So acting opposite.
That's really clear too. Because you can feel the pattern and you do that's
and
like,
just
that's
do the
really
opposite.
Clear.
Yeah, and even that sits with, so if you're angry, in other words, your bodily posture might be to clench your fists, or to, you may get red or feel hot, or, your posture is angry. And so you want to do the opposite, open your hands, be more open. Like we have a concept in DBT also, willingness versus willfulness. And we have postures to help with being more open. So if we have our palms up like this, we can practice being more open to the world or to whatever experience we have, or to be more skillful. And so we also have another one called half smile, which is sort of, just a little, just that you can feel you're just smiling, that maybe others might not notice, and that can help send a different signal to the brain that says, I'm happy or I'm content, because we can send signals to the brain based on our posture. So opposite action is a lot about that as well. And then the other one I find super helpful is check the facts. The idea that when we're feeling hurt, because so often we don't check the facts, right? And this can cause a lot of anxiety and pain. We feel someone's hurt us, and then we get more angry and we start making assumptions about this person who has said something that hurt us. And meanwhile, this person may have been hurting themselves, like hurting emotionally, and said something, or had no idea that they'd said something that hurt someone else. I like to say to my clients that everyone in our lives at some point is going to hurt us or disappoint us, and not by choice, or, I like to say people don't wake up in the morning and say, how am I going to, make someone feel bad today? Yes. People don't do that, but we do inadvertently, just because we don't know people's histories and experiences and how they're doing, and are they in halt, hungry, angry, lonely, tired at the moment. We're very, much more sensitive. So
and what was that? Halt?
Oh, halt, hungry, angry, lonely, tired.
Got it.
So this is a concept that we teach when we teach what's called the please skills, which is all about self-soothe. So that's an acronym. There's a lot of acronyms in DBT to help us remember the skills. But yeah.
Would it be accurate to say that if someone learns to use one of those skills that we just talked about, that they are learning to trust themselves? Like, meaning that they are learning that they can experience anxiety, because we will, and know that they will be able to rely on themselves to manage it. Because I always like the idea of trust.
Yeah,
because that's connected.
For sure. Yeah, exactly. So I believe for sure, once someone practices the skills, they can learn to trust that things can get better. Yeah. And that's why the practice is so important, right? Learning that things can get better. if we just practice new ways of being, new ways of handling our intense emotions and anxiety, and definitely we can build more trust in ourselves and in others. I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
And because of so much of what you taught me, I feel now that it's like a wealth, it's a richness. Like if somebody has money and they have a major car breakdown, they don't think about it. They're just like, okay, I need half the motor replaced, I need a new piston. Like there's no wrinkle in their day. And that's what I find can happen is you still have anxiety and you might have big occurrences, and the anxiety's there, but you know that it's a natural reaction, and you can trust yourself to have that experience. Again, you're sensitive, you're alive, you're vibrating. How great! You're going to experience more beauty, and there's something that doesn't participate in the anxiety. It can manage. It just it's a wealth.
Trusting yourself.
Yeah. You trust
you can
yourself.
Get through it.
To me now, sometimes it just feels like it's there, and people are like almost waiting for you to freak out. Like, how did you hear him? Did you hear what they said? It's like, oh yeah, I did. And now I'm postulating. I'm comprehending what is the next best step, because there's something that just can't participate in the chaos anymore. Like it's just a wealth. It's saying, yeah, like you say, it is what it is, and something doesn't participate, so it has clarity, and it can manage and make options, take choices, have options, whereas before, no options. I don't have any money for a major car repair. It's
and
a right away.
Flying off the handle, flipping the lid.
I
like to tell my clients sometimes that perhaps we don't have the luxury, when we tend to have this greater sensitivity of this beautiful gift, to get super angry or super fearful or super anything. We need to try and radical acceptance, use the skills we have, keep things on a lesser, even keel. That I love that definitely relates to radical acceptance. And I think of an example when, for instance, maybe your bike was stolen. And
9 times actually, yeah.
9 times?
I'm on number 10, I think.
Oh my gosh, that's a lot of bike
Toronto.
stealing. Okay, so perhaps you could really relate to this example from a personal place. The idea that something has happened, our bike has been stolen. And the person who goes at that with, oh, this isn't fair, this is happening again, why is this happening? It's always going to happen, and my bike's getting stolen, and I'll never get another bike, and what am I going to do? Of course, that person isn't going to make the change to reduce the stress as quickly as the person who's like, oh, I'm so disappointed, my bike has been stolen, right? A little bit of validation, that's important. And where's the nearest bike store?
Exactly.
Right? I accept it is what it is and move on without, taking it all on in a big way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I went to Kijiji that day, bought a secondhand bike, and now I only use Bulldog locks. They're
they're the best.
They're the best. They're bulletproof. They're the only ones you can use. Yeah.
Totally.
And I've got all my bikes. I have 3 bikes, and I still have 3 bikes. They have.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, there's just something you said there, if I remember. No, I'll keep going. So I know that many people have probably seen the mindfulness and the yoga statistics about how it changes the brain, how it helps with self-regulation. And it's just, I always feel like self-regulation always sounds so scientific, like you get really good at regulating yourself. And yet it's really accurate that when you start to feel that you can change how you're feeling, you really want to spend some time on the meditation pillow or breathing or in the walk or the volunteer work or the gardening or the yoga, the thing that brings you back into yourself to feel like you're home. So what was my question? I know you are a fellow yogini and yoga teacher. How has yoga helped you?
Yoga has helped me immensely. And what's interesting is the first time I did yoga many years ago, I didn't like it. And I felt, of course, this was back in the age of aerobics. Everything was, quick. You went to step classes and everything was about moving quickly.
Yeah.
And my first yoga class, I thought, ooh, this is really slow. And then I was so thankful that I actually had signed up for 10 classes, because that had me going back. I thought, well, I'm going to do the 10 classes. And so as I went through the classes, I started to become aware of how much better I felt after every class. My mind, my mood, my body, everything felt better. So, of course, then many yoga classes later, then I went to, yoga teacher training, and the rest is history. So I became a yoga teacher, and I do enjoy the times when I can help someone move their body in a way that's going to be helpful.
Nice.
So yoga has helped me immensely.
Excellent. I totally agree with that part. Like, yoga can be really hard and it doesn't feel good. Like, it can be really hard, and that's where you know you have the most to gain from it, because there's so much tension.
Oh, I think there's a good pain. You know,
Yes.
if you've experienced it, you know what that
Yes.
means. You know, the idea that when you have that perfect stretch where it's a little bit painful, but you know that it's really good for you and it's going to feel good
Yes.
later, even more so. So you're going to get this great benefit out of it. So, yeah, I think there's such a thing as good pain.
Yes. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to thank Julie Hayden of Dialectical Living, who teaches dialectical behavior therapy, for coming and taking the time to help us understand how we can help our emotions when they get really escalated and we don't know how to change. We don't know what to do. And she is able to really reach people where they're at, which is what we learn to do when the anxiety escalates and we don't know what to do. We have stuff in our toolbox way before the fire comes. We know where the fire exit is. So practicing these skills that Julie highlighted, they'll really help you to know that you can rely on yourself to help yourself, and you'll have a specific skill that you use. And that way, when things start to escalate, you pause and you go to the skill.